This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
The guy that invented situational ethics from a loving point of view, from a Christian theological point of view, ended up dying an avowed atheist and head of the Eugenics Society for population control. Rat poison starts with a rat. Even if it's 90% good, it's 10% of poison, but it always originates from a rat.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Jessica Beatty. In 2013, preacher Russell Moore claimed that Jesus was an illegal immigrant and that Christians should welcome undocumented immigrants with open arms. Last Christmas, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested that Jesus was a refugee. Is this a correct understanding? Or are leftist evangelicals and politicians twisting the narrative to push Marxist ideology? And if so, how did this happen? Today's interview digs deep into this topic to answer these questions and more. Here's America Daily contributor Timothy Gebhardt.
There is a campaign being waged to subvert and collapse Judeo-Christian society, its values and culture, within the United States and replace it all with Communist Socialist ideologies, supplanted in, often by deception. I'm sitting down with Judd Saul, the director of the film and production called Enemies Within the Church, that gives us an insight into and exposes this campaign. Many in the Christian community have been noticing the startling changes the church in the United States has gone through within the last few years and feel that this film will be decisive in waking the Christian community up to the war being waged on the Christian faith. You can learn more about the film at enemieswithinthechurch.com. Judd Saul has also directed Enemies Within, a hit film that uncovers Marxist officials working within the highest reaches of the United States government, and also Unfair, Exposing the IRS. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here, sir.
So this is such a massive topic. So first, what we're going to do is look at it from a bird's eye view. In your film and production, Enemies Within the Church, you label Marxists as the enemy. And they found a footing in the church. They're trying to change the church from within. And so when you think of Marxists, you think of materialists, atheists. So how are they pulling this off?
Well, what you're finding is what I believe to be a key few change agents that have been the architects of blending Marxist ideology with Christian theology and kind of creating their own doctrine out of it. And for a lot of people that don't know any better, that don't know how to spot this stuff, if it's coming from a pastor at a pulpit, these people are just eating it all up and they think it's proper Christian doctrine. And most people aren't reading their Bible, they're not reading the scriptures, they're not studying what they should be studying to find out what's real and what's not. And so if you have cultural Marxism, which we all know is being flooding into schools, it's flooding into colleges, it's in our media, it's in every aspect of our culture, why wouldn't it be getting into the church? Why wouldn't people trying to be targeting that? And so our research has shown that right after Obama got elected, we saw a massive increase in funding and a massive spike of this coming into what we would consider conservative evangelical circles. And after Trump's election, we saw this thing go on steroids and people weren't hiding it anymore. And they've really revealed themselves who they really are.
So these Marxists, this was a deliberate plan, am I correct?
I would have to, with all the circumstantial evidence that we've seen, it had to have been a deliberate plan. And then it's like, well, how can you say that? That sounds conspiratorial. Well, if you look at how the information was disseminated, when it was disseminated, and how all of a sudden multiple organizations are using the same talking points at once, this had to come from and originate from somewhere. And we've been following the money trails and we've been following where the stuff is originating, and it all goes back to a few key players.
So how big is this issue? Trevor Loudon, he mentioned the funding aspect of this. There's massive amounts of money being pumped into it, from these Marxist organizations trying to infiltrate the church, all these educational programs to give them talking points on the issues, things like that they bring into the seminaries, all that. So what is the scope of this whole issue?
The scope is huge. I mean, we're seeing entire conservative seminaries being completely transformed, like in a 2-year period, like where they've completely changed their philosophy. They've changed their education programs. For instance, we have I'll just name a seminary, Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, which was a flagship seminary for the Southern Baptist Convention. Now you got to say this is a very conservative, known to be a conservative institution. Well, now Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary has removed the requirement for somebody who's getting a master's in their divinity, a seminary degree. They've removed the requirement for them to take a hermeneutics course. Now, I'm using big words. For those that don't know what hermeneutics is, this is how you interpret scriptures in its proper context, its historical context. This is a way you analyze history. It's not just scriptures. This is how you analyze history. This was written at such and such period of time, and this is who it was written to, why it was written. But now they're teaching people that are coming out of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary to read the scriptures through a modern day lens of their culture, of their experiences. So they're no longer interpreting a historical document in its proper context. They're saying, well, this is my experience. This is how I feel today. So I'm reading this scripture, and this must mean what it means because that's how I feel. That's massively dangerous. And if you want to destroy the foundation of any institution, that is exactly what you'd want to do.
So these Marxists are working from within the church, right? To take it down from within by totally altering Christian doctrine. So what are they teaching?
They are implementing what we call critical race theory, which is essentially liberation theology. This is theology invented by the Russians. It was invented by the Marxists to flood into Latin America and in Africa, and they brought in this new theology to try to turn the countries around, to rebel against the establishment, and to liberate themselves from imperialist and capitalist evils. And this got introduced into the United States because when the civil rights movement was happening back in the 60s, they said, this is a theology that we can introduce to the civil rights movement. And then that's where you see a split from civil rights being about civil rights to then trying to destroy capitalism and turn us into a socialist country. Now, what's happened is this theology was pretty much dead in the U.S. in the 70s. A lot of black churches kind of took it on in urban areas, and they practiced liberation theology to some degree or another. But this old theology is now crept up, and it's being taught in conservative Christian seminaries as, oh, this is a good doctrine. They're not teaching it in a bad light; they're teaching it in a good light. So it's through you study scriptures through the lens of privilege, and this is where you come up with ideas that Jesus was an illegal immigrant, which is completely false. And you have college kids coming out of seminaries to be pastors that end up hating their country. They hate the very foundations that this country was on, and they also happen to hate capitalism because they think it's evil and sinful. Now, this has happened. This is the product of what's coming out of modern conservative seminaries. And we have plenty of evidence. We have people who've written us letters. We have eyewitness testimonies, people sitting in classes. We have video evidence of this happening, and this stuff exists.
Coming up next, Judd explains how we got to this point and what church leaders can do. Welcome back. We have director Judd Saul with us talking about his upcoming film, Enemies Within the Church.
In Christianity, there's the Bible to guide Christians. So how does this new Marxist social justice gospel, with its intersectionality, critical race theory, modern leftist political issues like open borders, celebrating abortions and on, come in and skew everything.
It's like anything. So for I would say just the average naive person that doesn't know what this stuff is or where this stuff originates, they get in by saying, we're an all-white church. We have privilege. You should feel guilty for having your privilege. There's not enough black people in your church, even though you live in a town that has 1% black population. That must mean you're racist. And they get gullible people into, that people want to be right with God. So if you have a pastor saying this is sinful and this is evil, they manipulate them into believing that they're sinning just for the color of their skin. There's evidence of this. We had a guy call us a couple months ago and sent us evidence. His pastor, in the middle of a sermon, called him and his wife out and told them that they need to repent and ask for apology from another couple in the church because one was white, one was black, and they had the same last name.
Oh, really?
The pastor did it in the middle of a church service. This is a Southern Baptist church that this happened in. And said, your ancestors must have owned them as slaves somewhere in your thing. You're guilty of slavery. You're guilty of modern day lynching. You need to apologize. And so they were like, did we do something wrong? They were in tears. They were crying. They went back and read and looked into their history to find out if there was any slavery. Guess what? Their parents immigrated in the late 1800s. Had nothing to do with slavery. But they just happened to have the same common last name as this other couple. And they went to the pastor. And the pastor said, well, you should apologize anyway because you have privilege. Yeah. But what happened to this church? This church is now ripped apart and split apart because this is not a uniting doctrine. This is actually divisive doctrine. This whole rat poison pill is designed to rip apart people and churches and disrupt unity. Now, as Christians, we believe there's a unity in Christ. Color of skin doesn't matter. It's all about our souls, our character, and truly loving one another is what Christianity is about. Skin color has nothing to do with it. Once we're all Christians, we are all saved under God. We're all sinners deserving of torment, but Jesus Christ came to save all of us. All right, there's a unifying message in Christianity. Now, you introduce critical race theory, intersectionality, you introduce these ideas. These are just poison pills dropped in to disrupt and advance a perpetual victimhood. Like I said, you have useful idiots that feel guilty and they think they're doing the right thing by advancing this because they want to be liked by people. They want to be liked by the culture. Like I said, they're getting the same message from schools. They're getting the same message from from the universities, seminaries, culture, everything else. And they say, if you have an opposing opinion or you think differently than this, then you are evil, you must be bigoted, and you're not racist. Everyone wants to be liked. And it's much harder to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and this is a stupid ideology that needs to be expunged from our churches. Well, now they're going to point at you as being the divisive one. You're not going along with the program. And then they start ostracizing you. Once you drop in a poison pill that causes chaos, disruption, and there's no forgiveness in sight when it comes to this. When it comes to liberation theology and critical race theory, there's no forgiveness. There's no resolve. So you have this perpetual victimhood. You have this perpetual conflict. So what does that do? It demoralizes you. It demoralizes your church. Okay? This whole thing is a poison pill to deconstruct. And that's its purpose. That's its main goal, is to deconstruct the foundation of what that is. So let's look at it from a geopolitical aspect. If you break down the church, the Christian faith, which is the rock of our nation, the glue that holds sanity and morality together in our country, if you deconstruct that, you break that apart, what do you have left? If you have now Christians that hate their country, they're also being told that having a family is now, if you want a family, you're idolizing. Wanting a family is now idolatry, is what they're saying. If you are now saying that pro-life is no longer pro-life, it's still okay to kill children. It's okay to vote for a socialist because they care about the people after they're born versus the child in the womb. So they're saying pro-life is, you can be pro-life and vote for a socialist, or be pro-life and maybe vote for a Republican, but it's probably better to vote for a socialist because they care about the poor. This is what they're saying. This is coming from conservative evangelical institutions, and they're teaching the youth this.
One thing, where do pastors come into this? Because, they're shepherds leading the flock here. And as you said, these Marxist ideologies are sweeping across all of Christianity. So what can pastors do in this situation?
Pastors need to educate themselves. Okay, whatever moron that taught you at seminary to stay out of politics and to stay out of these issues and out of these affairs, forget what they said. Grow up and think for yourself. Educate yourself. As I'm telling you right now, I'm telling this to pastors, if you don't stand up now, you ain't going to have a church left. Either you're going to stand up and fight and go to prison, or you're going to cower away and try to blend in with everybody else. And I'm saying if you don't stand up now, I think you're going to be the latter. Because we just had Democrat candidate for president on a national stage say that churches should lose their tax-exempt status if they have a wrong opinion on gay marriage. This is Beto O'Rourke, to an astounding applause in that room. People applauded it, and a lot of the other candidates are going, "Oh, that's not a bad idea." That was said on a national stage. This is right around the corner, and I'm saying this to the same guys that said, "Hey, we warned you about gay marriage, but you did nothing. You didn't speak up for it. We warned you what was going to happen if we didn't fight." People warned you when we said they're going to take God out of schools, and you guys didn't fight for it. People like me and people that are involved with the film have been warning people for hundreds of years. They look in the Bible of examples when they tell somebody, you are going down the wrong path, you need to stand up and fight. But we always watch what happens. Hardly anyone listens. They cower to the culture, and it advances further and further to the left. There's ignorance, and then there's willful ignorance. And there's a bit of both. And I think pastors, if you care about your flock, if you really genuinely care about your community, if you really love your neighbor, you will take the time, do some research, and start standing up for what's right.
Okay, and would you say that's the main goal of this film?
Yeah, the main goal of this film is not to go to pastors. The main goal of this thing is to go to people in the pews that know better. People in the pews, that person sitting in their church that says, yeah, we know this is going on. We've been here for years. Our pastor's taking us down a terrible path. We're putting the puzzle together for them. We're showing it to them. And we're going to give them something that they can use to hopefully change the circle around them. Give this to your pastor, help educate him, get other people to do the right thing. This is a wake-up call, what the purpose of this film is. Our goal is we want to create a network. So this is more than just a film, it's a movement. When I say movement, we want to create a resource. When pastors say, I agree with what you're saying here, how can we fight this? We want to jump on board. We want to put together a list of safe churches that people can go to across the country. Like if you're a Lutheran, you want to go to a Lutheran church, and there's Lutheran pastors that say, hey, we're on board with this movie. We want to stop this movement. We want to send people to your church. If you're Wesleyan, if you're a Baptist pastor that says, hey, my church does not sign on to the social justice movement, send them here. We want to create a list of safe places to go.
With situational ethics, it's these small things that add to a big thing, right?
So situational ethics, I'll just run through what that is real quick. Situational ethics was invented by a pastor named Joseph Fletcher. He was at the Harvard Divinity School, taught theology at Harvard, and he was a pastor. So he came up with this idea of situational ethics, which is, whatever the greatest outcome must be the most loving, but that whatever's most loving is subjective. It's how I feel is the most loving, not what's right or wrong. So there's no objective truth in it, but it's based on how I feel is the most loving.
And this is opposed to the traditional Christian worldview where it's basically everything set in stone.
Right. It's written. There's black and white. Bible has, for any type of situation, there's an answer in the Bible to any type of, regular life living situation. Bible to us is a blueprint for life. And that blueprint covers everything. And when you start introducing situational ethics, it is, how do I feel? What is the most loving at the time? So it's like, so what do we hear now, especially with the homosexual movement? We can't tell them that, hey, you're living in sin and you should probably clean up your lifestyle and repent before God. No, the loving thing to do is, we just accept you and affirm you, because that's the path of least resistance, and it's the most loving with the least amount of conflict. And Joseph Fletcher invented this whole ideology, and most of the church embraced this. I've heard preachers preach this in Baptist churches. We got to do what's loving. We got to do what's loving. Not what's biblical, but what's loving. Now, here's the funny thing about Joseph Fletcher. Okay? It's not funny. It's actually sick. His wife was a communist. She worked with Margaret Sanger, helped her out with Planned Parenthood. Joseph Fletcher ended up dying an avowed atheist and head of the Eugenics Society. So the guy that invented situational ethics from a loving point of view, from a Christian theological point of view, sold tons of books in the 60s and 50s, ended up dying an avowed atheist and head of the Eugenics Society for population control. So rat poison starts with a rat. Even if it's 90% good, it's 10% of poison, but it always originates from a rat.
Coming up next, how faith got separated from culture and education. Welcome back. We have director Judd Saul with us, talking about his upcoming film, Enemies Within the Church.
With situational ethics, to do what feels good, from what it seems, is that, it's emasculating people and warping their sense of right and wrong. And what about the really pushing this pietism, where you are basically only confined to the church to express your faith?
Okay, so I'll just go into pietism real quick. I can't give you the direct who's what, but I can give you the basic history. Pietism was started in the late 1600s. It was founded by some crazy Lutheran theologians. And the idea of pietism is we keep our faith to ourselves. We don't really engage in culture. It's just between us and God. It's like when you go to a church and you hear a pastor say, "Oh, we just stick to the gospel. We don't stick to any other issues." That's pietism. But where this originated is these theologians came up with the idea. There was a lot of conflict in Germany between Catholics and Lutherans because of Martin Luther, and there's wars and stuff going on. And these theologians came up with the idea of pietism, where Christians would just stay in their churches and they wouldn't get involved in government matters. And the king loved it so much. He loved this idea of pietism. Oh, Christians not involved in government, they get off my back. I love this. The king took government money, German money, and funded 3 seminaries to teach this theology. And then this theology spread like wildfire throughout Scandinavia and Europe. Okay? Now, and then it got to the United States in the late 1800s with the German, the Dutch migrations and all that stuff coming to the Midwest. In all aspects, every denomination has picked up some form of pietism. Okay? Well, we just stick to the gospel. We don't get involved in those matters. That's blah, blah, blah. That's not what God wants us to do. That's all pietism. But let's look at history. Let's look at the history of pietism for a second. Started in Germany. What happened in Germany after pietism took hold? 2 world wars, the invention of Marxism, and you had Christians staying in their churches, ringing the bells extra loud when the Jews went by on their way to the death camps, and Christians did not intervene. They were such a moralist society because the Christians were staying in the churches, not get involved in the culture, that they allowed for a thing like World War I and World War II to happen. What was pietism funded and designed to do? To emasculate Christians, keep them out of government, not be involved in public policy. Ta-da!
So with the education of children, especially now, do you see that playing a role in all this, where we're at now with this separation of faith and education?
Yeah, completely separation of faith and education. And it's just Well, what do we do? We keep staying out of the Christians aren't fighting. They're not fighting. In fact, the funny thing, the crazy part is the Christians that are standing up and fighting, the moral majority and the people that really brought the Reagan Revolution and that resurgence back into Christian conservatism, they were mocked by a lot of the church. They were mocked by people, and they're mocked by Christians to this day for standing up and trying to do what was right.
With this film, what are some of the challenges you face in making it?
Our biggest trouble is finance. We've had financial struggles trying to make the film because a lot of people who are pietists and have been trained in situational ethics think we're divisive and think we're mean. And a lot of Christians are just uncomfortable having a little bit of conflict because they think conflict means sin. Conflict doesn't mean sin. When you're standing for truth and actually engaging in a real discussion, which is, like I said, Marx has done its job. Cultural Marxism achieved. We can't have tough conversations because it makes people feel awkward and uncomfortable. And when you have these conversations with a pastor, they're trained to just push you out because they don't want conflict. So how's that happen with kids in education? You're seeing it right now. Kids are not taught their American history. Kids are not taught biblical history, let alone the biblical foundations that this country was founded. I talked to, let's say, 49 out of 50 millennials that went to college do not believe our Christian was a Christian nation. They've been taught in high school, contrary, that our nation was not founded on biblical principle. When you look at actual history, read it in its historical context and everything around it, there's evidence that proves otherwise.
And these were the founding fathers.
These are the founding fathers, right. Prior to pietism, these guys were not pietists.
Yeah, I figured that much.
We had I made the statement earlier, but it's like we went from the Black Robe Regiment, where men had a Bible in one hand, a gun in the other, ready to defend their nation, to stand against tyranny. And what do we have now? We got smiley-faced pastors wearing pink cardigans, and I call them the Pink Cardigan Brigade. They're worthless.
There's a verse you have written down that kind of encapsulates these issues you're talking about. I'll just read it quick here if that's okay. In Matthew 10:16, Jesus intentionally warns, quote, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep amidst wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." In John 8:44, Jesus refers to the devil as the father of lies. So is that the big issue you see here? What you want the film enemies within the church to expose? Kind of like these wolves in sheep's clothing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly that's why we put the verse in. And the thing is what we are doing with our film is biblical. I mean, I've gotten biblical counsel, talked to many pastors on this, read the scriptures. What we're doing is biblical. Okay. We are naming the names and exposing the wolves that are in sheep's clothing with this film. And we're making you aware of it. And you can either take the truth or you can reject it, just like Christ. You either accept Christ, go to heaven, or you reject Christ or go to hell. We're telling you, you take the truth of what we're saying and you take it, give us a fair shot at what we're trying to do and expunge this material, this ideology from your church and your teachings and from your church libraries.
And when is this film going to be out?
As soon as we get the money to make it. So the status of the film is this: we're 65% done. We're trying to raise the rest of the funds so we can finish the film and put it to market and get it, let people know it exists and get it out there. We're 90 days out from funding. We have all our research done. All our interviews the rest of our interviews are all teed up. We're ready to go. We just need the blankets and bullets.
Have you noticed any of these changes in your community? You can share your thoughts on our Facebook page at AD Top Story of the Day. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.